Hello, I'm Christina Presenti from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and I'm happy to welcome you to the webinar, the McKenzie County SART on a Successful SART. This is one of many webinars you can find in the SART Toolkit at www.nsdrc.org/SART Toolkit. This webinar is one of many related to SART work. I'm really excited today because we're actually going to hear from people on a SART and their experiences of forming a SART and what that looks like in order to achieve success. NSDRC would like to thank the Office for Victims of Crime for their support and funding of this webinar and the entire SART Toolkit. And again, you can find more information about SART, forming SARTs, critical response to victims, and all aspects of SART work at www.nsdrc.org/SART Toolkit. And I'm going to hand it over to Susie to get you all started with introductions and to get into the really exciting content of today's webinar.
Hello, everyone. As Christina said, my name is Susie Kramer-Brenna. I'm the Rural Program Administrator for CAWS North Dakota, located in Bismarck. We are the state coalition office working on issues of domestic violence and sexual violence around the state of North Dakota, offering technical assistance and training. And I would like for the other McKenzie County SART members to introduce themselves. So if we'll start with Jennifer.
Okay, I'm Jennifer Winter, and I'm a victims advocate with Family Crisis Shelter, and I've been with the program right at about 4 years now.
Jesse.
My name is Jesse Wellen. I'm the Assistant Chief of Police here at Watford City Police Department. I've been here for about 7 years with the department and a member of the SART team since the beginning, roughly 2012.
And Desiree.
Hi, I'm Desiree Sorenson. I'm the Director of McKenzie County Social Services. I have also been living in Watford City since 2011 and have been involved with the SART system, or the SART team, when it started.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we thought before we get started giving information about the SART team, we felt it was important to give some background about this area of North Dakota, what was going on during the time when we decided to build the SART team in McKenzie County. So North Dakota currently has about 750,000 people living in 53 counties, which is one of the highest population counts in our state's history. What we've seen, as you can see from the graphic, so we have what is called the Bakken oil fracking region. And if you look at the graphic on the screen, you can see over towards the left-hand side, the little dot that says Watford City, and then that area with all that gray is a very intense part of the Bakken oil fracking region where starting in about 2010, we started to see rapid growth in this western county, and this was related to oil energy development. So thousands of people, the majority of them men, working in or seeking jobs in the oil fields, moved to North Dakota starting around 2010. So we saw a statewide 4% population increase. And this is as compared to an average of 1.4% increase in the rest of the United States. So thousands and thousands of people, a lot of them men, moving into this oil fracking area. McKenzie County experienced significant population increase by 2013, and this growth actually is showing no signs of slowing down. The community of Watford City grew from, prior to the Bakken oil boom, as we call it, there was about 1,500 people in the year 2007. This little community grew to 10,000 people between 2010 and 2016. So this growth is focused in an area west of the Missouri River in a previously very remote part of the state. And as this population increase was happening, one of the things that this county saw was that they did not have the infrastructure to sustain services needed to provide safe, secure environments for everyone living there, particularly victims of sexual violence and their families. Desiree, can you talk about, having been there, having grown up in that part of the state, can you talk about what McKenzie County was like prior to the oil boom?
Yes, I can. Prior to the oil boom, I grew up around Dickinson, and then my husband is originally from here in Watford City, and so we have been together for the past almost 18 years, and so when we would come to visit friends and family here, the community was primarily a farm and agriculture community. It had a very small main street. It had two very small local grocery stores that were only open till 6 o'clock on the weekdays and were not open on the weekends. Just one example of the community agencies and what services were being offered. There really was not any counseling services or, like I said, the very small community meet your day-to-day needs, but not a lot of options.
Okay. Jennifer or Jesse, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'm thinking about the hospital. We have a very small hospital at that time, and the location of where Watford City and McKenzie County is situated, we're an hour from the nearest town that has any hospitals. So that was another thing that we were looking at that period in time.
Okay, so what you're saying is that medical services, when as we're calling it the oil boom, when that oil boom was starting, it was a very small rural hospital with a limited number of services that were available, particularly for sexual violence victims?
Yes, and with the boom picking up, the demand for emergency room assistance with oil field related injuries was definitely a huge focus.
So we had a very small rural hospital that suddenly had to take in many, many victims of oil field accidents. I know that, and Jesse, could you say something about too what was going on as aggravated assaults or car accidents? Maybe talk about how the traffic got to be so horrendous there.
Well, one thing that I noticed with the traffic was at that time there was substantial delays. There was basically a main street and our Highway 23, two main roads coming into town everybody was using. The infrastructure wasn't set up with the bypasses that we have now. We'd have traffic lined up for 16 blocks at a time because there wasn't enough movement going on. So, but also, like previously mentioned, not only medical services, but all services in the city were short at that time. It was a very small community with, big city problems.
Well, and even the hotel accommodations weren't there. There weren't the townhomes that have now been built. The schools were very pressed at the seams with new students. Everything was very highly demanded, and the structure was not there.
Okay. Thank you. So considering all of what Jesse, Desiree, Jennifer just said, we also need to take a look at what was going on specifically with sexual violence in western North Dakota. So as you can see on the screen, North Dakota's total number of reported violent index crimes in 2008, so this was prior to or just at the start of when oil activity was picking up, so that included murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault. The total number for our state was 1,035. By 2014, North Dakota's total number of reported crimes against persons, and that includes murder, rape, and assaults, grew to 8,645. That is an 800+% increase between 2008 and 2014. Specifically for McKenzie County, rates of sexual violence crimes became 4 times higher with the population increase, and we feel that part of that issue was the violent cultural values and actions that male workers brought with them, tied into the rapidly increasing number of men and women that were moving to McKenzie County. There was also a lack of easily accessible rape crisis advocacy and collaborative supportive services in this area, and that would include law enforcement, medical, prosecution, social services, and that was leaving far too many victims without the help and the assistance that they needed. So Family Crisis Shelter, the local domestic violence rape crisis center, is located in Williston, which is about an hour north of Watford City. Family Crisis Shelter found themselves very underfunded and short-staffed as the number of sexual assaults and domestic violence victims came to them for help. And they were being forced to operate in a kind of 24-hour crisis mode, helping sexual violence victims from McKenzie County, driving up that hour to Williston. And this was leaving victims underserved, and it was forcing staff to work so hard they were becoming stressed out and burned out and exhausted. We know that looking at the victim numbers during that time, about 80% or more of that client load was impacted by oil, meaning that either the offender worked in the oil fields or the victim had moved to the area because of the economic upturn and the jobs that were available. So Jennifer, as the advocate for Family Crisis Shelter, can you tell us more about what you heard from the staff that are there about what that time was like working for Family Crisis Shelter?
Well, it was basically like triage in a hospital in the aspect that it was hurry, 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 get there as quickly as you can. And if we were located in, say, Florida, we would not have the winters and the impairment of snow and ice to deal with when traveling. But, you've got that hour's time. You want to get there to that victim as quickly as possible. And a lot of road time, a lot of being careful with the driving, but doing the best that you can do to offer service. And at that time, there were 2 advocates in that office, so they were handling a high volume that was demanded upon them, and they had not yet been able to add staff. So that was a detriment.
So how was that impacting sexual violence victims who were living in McKenzie County? Jesse, what was?
Time.
Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, no, they had a wait time. Law enforcement was dealing with things on their end, but things weren't as smooth as it could be, not at the fault of law enforcement, but there was not the continuity because there was no one here that was in the advocacy program. So law enforcement would deal with the initial call, and Jesse could speak more to that part, but, then they had a wait time. And so, the wait of the advocate to get here and be part of it, and then turn around and drive another hour again to the hospital, and all the while that victim survivor is being asked to please not go to the bathroom, please just hang in here with us and be patient, we're getting you taken care of. But you can imagine what that felt like to that individual in that moment.
Mm-hmm. So Jesse, what was that like for law enforcement trying to deal with this surge of criminal activity and then working with a sexual violence victim who would come to you for help? And were there hospital or forensic medical exam services available in your area during that time?
So on the law enforcement standpoint, this was very difficult with the influx of population. and some statistical information. In 2010, we were responding to 2,344 calls for service annually. By this time in 2012, we had a 268% increase for calls for service, and also over 400% increase in crime reporting during that time. But also for the services here in Watford City, Watford City Police Department previously had to take the victims to Williston, Dickinson, Sydney, due to the lack of resources to receive a SANE examination. Then also without having resources, they previously transported victims to shelters or had to reach out to churches if the shelters were full, because at that time the shelters were very limited with capacity, and the shelter that you speak of in Williams County also services other counties outside of Watford City. I mean, it services Williams County, and it could only hold approximately 10 victims at that time.
So when you talk about, so this was when you're looking for medical services for victims of sexual assault, you were driving victims up to Williston, an hour north. You were driving over to Sydney, Montana. You said you were going to Dickinson, which is about 90 minutes south of Watford City. Were there SANE services available?
There were, depending on the time. I mean, the SANE services were often on call, and you'd have to call ahead to make sure something was available, and which resulted in one time where a victim was taken to Williston and the services weren't available, so then they had to be taken out of state to Sydney because it was much closer than traveling the opposite direction and remaining in state. I've also heard of other stories where law enforcement had to transport to the eastern side of the state due to the services not being readily available within a 3-hour time frame.
So extremely re-traumatizing and definitely not victim-centered.
Absolutely.
Okay. Desiree, from a social services standpoint, were you hearing from the clients you were working with, or can you speak to what was going on that you saw as far as how sexual violence and other crimes were impacting the families that you were working with?
We definitely saw an increase of cases where there were sexual assaults against children. And we worked very closely with law enforcement, and then they had to go to a child advocacy center to complete the interviews, and then they did also have the ability to do medical there as well. So we've been fortunate, but once again, those would be traveling to Minot, Bismarck, to do that, and that still is the current system right now also.
So the Children's Advocacy Centers for those child sexual abuse or child sexual assault victims, so Bismarck or Minot, we're looking at about a 90-minute to 2-hour drive?
Minot is about a little over 2 hours, and then Bismarck is closer to 3 hours.
All right. So having to take a victim out of their hometown and drive them to the larger city to get the services that they need.
Correct.
All right. So thinking about all of that, there came an opportunity for CAWS North Dakota, particularly for me as the rural program administrator, to look at these issues and how they were impacting McKenzie County. So I researched and I wrote a 3-year OVW rural grant to try to increase access to immediate advocacy services, rape crisis services, and provide some leadership to this community, to these affiliated professionals in Watford City and the county, McKenzie County, for developing and implementing a coordinated response to sexual assault, a SART. So this grant was written and submitted and was approved with the project period being from October 2013 through September 2016. So this was a 3-year grant. I wrote it with a very strong focus on sexual assault and collaborative response, and funding included in this grant was about $146,000 over a 3-year period for Family Crisis Shelter to create a new satellite office in Watford City with a full-time advocate position situated there. So an advocate was hired, and she worked through 2014. Jennifer was hired in early 2015, and then she took the responsibilities for the local SART coordination. This funding also paid for my time and travel with my position at CAWS North Dakota to, again, help provide some facilitation, some leadership to the SART team to help Jennifer in whatever area she needed help with, and with some very focused technical assistance, really, to both Family Crisis Shelter and those affiliated professionals in McKenzie County to form and maintain a SART there. When we were looking back at that first year, we were talking about several aspects of what it takes to form a SART, particularly in a rural area that is seeing and living with some rapidly changing environment and high levels of crime. So Jennifer came to the team after we had started with our first year, so I wanted to talk a bit with Desiree and Jesse. So Desiree, maybe you could talk about what did we do as a team in those first several meetings to look at team membership and who should be on the team.
We had talked about, obviously, who was the prime people that would be best supportive to make a successful team members and to continue to grow and serve the victims of sexual assault in our community.
So can you recall, or maybe you have a list in front of you, who were those initial team members when we started the SART?
Yep. The initial team members were Lana from the crisis shelter, and then we had a victim's witness, the advocate, the chief of police and assistant chief of police, the director of nursing through the hospital, sheriff's department, myself, which is social services, and then we had the nurse from Upper Missouri District Health Unit, another law enforcement officer, and then Tisha from Bismarck.
Okay, and just to note, Tisha was the head of the Central Dakota Forensic Nurse Examiners Agency based out of Bismarck, and at that time she had just started her agency as a nonprofit 501c3 to build SANE services in communities around the state, particularly in western North Dakota. Jesse, you were part of a previous project that CAWS North Dakota had brought to western North Dakota, where we worked on building coordinated community response, or CCR, efforts for domestic violence. So when it came time to look at implementing SART, as someone who was there from the very beginning, tell us about what that was like. I know that we made some decisions about where the team was going to be located and where the meetings were going to be held.
Yes, we originally started off with combined efforts between McKenzie County, Watford City Police Department, Williams County and Williston Police Department, along with the other members of the SART team. And from there, we made it more personalized to McKenzie County, Watford City area, as that was our service area. And also during that time, we established and created MOUs for the agencies involved, and also did some case review to establish those MOUs and best practices.
Yes, we did create a mission statement with a scope of focus, and then we had those MOUs for participation and with some roles and responsibilities, not yet speaking to specifically what each agency was going to do, but more looking from a broader scope of this is what we feel is important for this team, this is what we want to accomplish. And we did establish a working plan, and this was through the goals of the grant from CAWS North Dakota, more specifically for addressing that cross-system collaboration and that response to sexual assault. So some pretty specific activities and goals written into the grant with a timeline of when they were going to be accomplished. But I know Jesse and Desiree, we did do a lot of that working plan through our conversations, particularly when we were doing that case review. And Desiree, I'm wondering if you could tell us about what that was like, looking at how we were going to move forward as we worked on case reviews. We had the victim witness coordinator from the prosecutor's office pull closed cases, and we redacted any identifying information, and then signed on to a confidentiality statement saying that everything we talked about would stay in the room. Did you feel that that case review process was beneficial for the SART at that point?
Yes, I did, because then it allowed us to openly discuss areas of where we could improve and do things differently, and learn of how we could best support the victims and how we can support each other through each other's agencies and what their role was in the process.
Okay. So moving into that second year of this grant project, we really then focused on not only that assessment of data that we had, so both the numbers that we were getting from law enforcement, from Family Crisis Shelter, but then also looking at how can we, as a SART team, really hone in on some victim-centered protocols and hopefully increase offender prosecution in McKenzie County through this cross-system collaborative response. So one of the things that I did as the Rural Program Administrator was to use some SART tools from NSVRC, from Praxis International, from End Violence Against Women International, to help our team look at protocols, look at what can we do to specifically put into place these best practices for each agency that are coming to the table. One of the things that we also used was North Dakota had, I think by the year 2014, had written an evidence collection protocol specifically for sexual assault, and that was greatly beneficial to our team as well, because then we had the expertise of advocacy, law enforcement, medical, social services, prosecutors, and others that had come together through a series of meetings and written a standardized protocol of what would be the best practice, what would be adhering to state law, and what is the best victim-centered and trauma-informed way to work with sexual violence victims. So something else that we did in year 2, and Jesse and Jennifer, can you talk about the SART training. So the grant had written in monies for members of the McKenzie County SART to attend a national SART training. What was that like for you? Did you feel that it was beneficial?
Well, I can kick us off on that, Jesse, if you're okay with that. I at that point felt like I was still very new to the job as advocate here in McKenzie County. And Susie, you might recall that you had just said to me, now Jennifer, you realize that at some point I'm going to pass this baton and you're going to be chairing the meetings and coordinating. And to me that was very daunting because you really had everything together. You were leading so well and you had the ball rolling and you were doing such a beautiful job. And I thought, okay, there are pieces that are still not in place. And that scared me. And I remember when I went to that training in Minneapolis, there were so many people who were there. And there was, at that time, we did have good attendance at our monthly meetings, our sexual assault response team meetings. But there was one agency that was not present more than they were present. And that was a concern for all of us that we get that agency on board. And I remember going into that training thinking, okay, there are a few little hiccups here that need to be adjusted and I don't know what to do. One of the things that they did consistently during that training weekend was they had us break into small groups. And that gave opportunity for those who were established in their teams and had more seasoned years of practice to be able to feed into those of us that were new and upcoming and facing things that they'd already dealt with. So that was really helpful. I left that 2-day training thinking, you know, this is doable. They had given me some tools that I felt like were viable, that made me have hope for some things that were some small issues that were still needing to be smoothed out. And so that was my biggest takeaway from that, was the hope that those seasoned veterans, I guess, so to speak, were able to infuse into me.
Jesse, did you feel that the SART training was helpful?
You know, one thing that I guess I took away from it was, you know, it's beneficial with trainings like that where you can go somewhere else outside of the state and see how others are doing and completing their SART teams and developing and establishing those good points of contact for future use and getting other viewpoints. That is definitely one of the benefits of the training.
Okay, I'm going to step back here a second because I just want to touch on something that Jennifer, that you said, because we know that when we were doing this, when we were working on building a SART, building the collaborative services for sexual assault response, one of the things, and I'm sure others that are participating in this webinar can identify with, is that there can be some glitches. There can be some areas where we can look at it and say, okay, this is a gap, or this is something that we need to try to figure out, how are we going to do this? And I know, working with the SART, that one of the issues that we did have was that we had a very strong presence with the city police department, with Watford City Police, but there were some kind of hit and miss going on with the sheriff's department, which is often very common for a lot of areas around the country, is that you can have one law enforcement agency that is on board. You've got a leadership that believes in SART, but then you might have another one where they might not quite get it, or you don't see the support that was there from the other law enforcement agency. Jesse, I know that you have been a strong supporter of the SART from the very beginning. And something that you had mentioned when we were talking about our SART team was that one of the benefits of this team was those strong working relationships. Did you feel that your working relationship with Jennifer as the advocate from Friendly Crisis Shelter helped us to address some of these issues that the SART was facing?
Definitely. It's at this time we had to establish some better resources, and which I also believe that accredits to higher results of reporting. When you have those resources, victims aren't as reluctant. It also removed a great burden off the law enforcement, being able to have that resource available to talk to the victims and also associate and give them the resources and provide them with their needs, rather than always having law enforcement have that response.
Okay.
So
I know there was also, we struggled with some issues with the state's attorney, the county prosecution office. And we saw a change, and sometimes this can happen on a SART too, is that you are struggling to get someone to get the buy-in from a particular agency. And Jesse, you had mentioned this, that what happened with the prosecutor's office that brought a change to how they were responding to the SART team?
Well, the biggest change with the prosecutor's office here was it also went from a part-time position to a full-time position, with a drastic change in leadership up there. Also, it went from one state's attorney to include multiple assistants, to give them that flexibility to kind of be more involved in other aspects of their job. So that was a great change for us.
Okay. Before we move on to it, I wanted us to talk about the realities of sexual violence in McKenzie County during this time. And I know Jennifer and maybe Desiree, if you could talk about what you were seeing with the sexual violence victims who were coming to you for help. I know there were issues with drugs and alcohol, but also the level of violence that you were seeing.
Do you want me to kick off on that, Desiree? Well, for the violence shelter, the domestic violence and sexual assault shelters piece, as far as that puzzle goes, Williams County, our neighboring county, tells me that the violence that we see even now in McKenzie County with our assaults is much more than what they see there. And I can only relate that to the high volume of workers in the boom area. But we do see the need for, like when we take a sexual assault victim in, even at that time, we would sometimes have to have ER assistance before we had the same kit done, because there were needs for x-ray and different things such as that, CAT scan, because they had been beaten as well as sexually assaulted. And so that volume was there, and increasingly so. But at the same time, the substance abuse is a serious issue in this area, because the assaults are directly related to the high volume of substance abuse. Whether it is drug abuse or alcohol, it is definitely related. And I can see that in my stats when I look back at those.
And this is Desiree. I would also, add on the stressors of living in a smaller community that has the level of increase of population. The challenge is many people were living in campers and in very small campers. And when you have, and then as the oil boom continued on, families would be moving up here, so which then also increased the level of domestic violence and sexual assault with women and children. So once again, you're having families living in small quarters, maybe struggling with financial, money. And when anybody is in a small room, you don't have enough space to kind of breathe or to just relax, and if you're stressed. So, people who had homes in other states who you would consider to have stable kind of living arrangements were now up here living in a less than comfortable environment, which then just increases the risk for using drugs or alcohol, and then obviously then all of those things hand in hand increase the domestic violence and sexual assault.
Right.
Another thing that
go ahead. I was going to say, and to be clear, we're definitely not saying that one caused the other, but that it exacerbated or added that element of more severe violence or more damage.
Susie, I was just going to add to that in the same train of thought that you were going in, that it is not one or the other, but I see from the reports that are given to me from victims that the work demand physically on so many of the people that are here working in the oil industry, that is the beginning tip over for the addictions to come into play. And because so many of the people that I work with tell me that the addiction wasn't there in their household before they moved here and got into this work environment, or as Desiree put it so well, the living environment is difficult at that time, and it has shifted a lot now, but those close quarters, picture putting a family of 4 or a family of 5 into a small camper or a FEMA trailer. That's the living situation of so many people during that season of time, and it definitely all played together for a big hurricane.
And again, we also saw, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we were also seeing thousands of individuals moving in that already had the mindset, the cultural values, the belief system that violence against women was okay, that
yes.
sexual violence against women was okay. And one of that intersecting factors then, too, although our SART didn't necessarily focus on this because we did have another team working on this issue, was the element of sex trafficking that started and picked up in a big hurry in McKenzie County. So seeing all the number of sexual violence victims that were raped, that were brutalized, but were also then being trafficked.
Yes.
Is that correct, Jennifer? Would you say that was also an element of the level of violence that was going on?
Yes, we've had numerous reports during that season, especially of women being held and trafficked. And, there's a misnomer, I believe, that a lot of times people believe that someone who's being trafficked actually is willing and wants that lifestyle, and that was not what was being reported to me. This was reports of women that were being put into this and not willing.
So out of all this, and this was typical of a kind of conversation that would happen at our SART meetings, where we were not only focusing on moving the team forward, but also being very open to and allowing for these kinds of conversations to get a better handle on what was going on, to hear from the different agencies about what they were seeing, and then thinking about how can we as a SART address these issues. So something that we did do, and perhaps Desiree, Jennifer, Jesse, we did develop at the end of year 2 agency-specific MOUs that included some response protocols. Jesse, did you feel that the MOU at that time for the Watford City Police Department, was it useful? Did it make a difference in the way you yourself or your department responded to sexual assault victims?
You know, I think the MOUs, they were very helpful. I mean, it did establish good ground rules for moving forward, similar to like an SOP, and it showed buy-in from each agency who is participating in signing those MOUs. I do think we had a good grasp of a good response initially, but this really lays it out on paper so somebody else can look at it and say, yeah, this is good, this is what we have to do, and make sure each bullet point is touched on.
Yes.
I know something that we included in that MOU, if you could talk about this, was a very specific protocol saying that the Watford City Police Department would each and every time contact the Family Crisis Shelter advocate when a sexual violence victim reported to the police department.
Yes, that's in our MOU, and you know, that's been a common practice procedure of ours, you know, since we've had this started, even prior to, you know, MOUs. So.
Okay. Do you feel that that's making a difference for victims?
Oh, definitely. I think that, you know, we talked about you know, when the victim meets with the advocate, they can, you know, the advocate's very supportive of the other members of the SART team, and they set the tone for the next person that speaks with that victim by representing law enforcement or social services or who have you. They're going to lay that groundwork for us and let that victim know that we are there to help them, and it makes the process go easier right from the beginning.
Okay. So something else the team did focus on in years 2 and 3 was looking at what can we do to develop some localized SANE services in McKenzie County. So one of the things that we had available for us was Tisha Scheuer, who was the executive director of the Central Dakota Forensic Nurse Examiners. With Tisha on the team, we were able to look at, okay, what is it that we need? What can we do as a SART team to bring SANE services to McKenzie County? So one of the things that I did is that I talked with Lana, who was the director of Family Crisis Shelter based out of Williston, looking at the funding issue. And she decided to write, with my technical assistance, a state, North Dakota state SANE funding grant, which was approved. So Family Crisis Shelter then received close to $15,000 from the state of North Dakota to build SANE services in McKenzie County. Desiree, you were on the team then. Something that the team then did too was talking with McKenzie County Healthcare Systems about space for SANE services. Can you tell us what were those conversations like? What did we do as a team in working with the healthcare system, with the local hospital?
Well, what we discussed with them is obviously the need to have some kind of a space and for the SANE nurse to have access to the supplies that they would need to use in the exam. And so through that grant process, we were able to utilize a cart that they couldn't have a specific room within the hospital, but that cart was mobile, so it was able to be moved into an appropriate room at the hospital that would be able to be utilized.
Okay, so that we purchased a mobile cart. It was almost a locker kind of a unit that had a strong lock on it. And we put that on wheels, and then what the hospital, McKenzie County Healthcare Systems, agreed to, just as Desiree said, was that portable SANE unit that could be moved to an open patient room when a sexual assault victim reported to the hospital or to the emergency room. Were we able, though, Desiree, to get a SANE nurse on board right away?
No, we were not. It was very challenging. I think we were all trying to think out of the box, talking to anybody that we personally knew, professionally knew, that had an RN degree, because that was a requirement. And so I specifically remember emailing both of the local clinics that were in town kind of constantly, every once in a while kind of putting a little bug in their ear to say, hey, you know, we still kind of have this going on. This is a need. You know, if we want more information, please contact our SART group. We'd love to meet with you, just to even kind of give you a little bit of idea of what it would entail. And yes, Tisha was very helpful in that process, because obviously she could explain the training and the expectations of that. But it was very challenging because with a small community, obviously growing like that, there was not very many RNs available.
So Jennifer, how did we end up getting a SANE nurse for McKenzie County?
Well, as Desiree said, we were word of mouth a lot, and we also put ads in the papers and made a push that way, and we did that for several months before we got anybody to come on board.
Okay, but we did after, and this was at the getting close to the end of the grant period, we did get one RN that came forward and agreed to be trained as a SANE. And so we did use that state funding then to train that RN, both with the 40-hour training and the hands-on clinical training.
Yes, and that was, to me, well, to all of us, that was another milestone, because that was the beginning of, okay, this is getting real. You know, we have everything set in place with the MOU. We're all in agreement. There's continuity, but now we're getting closer to being active in this because of having one RN on board. It was just the beginning of putting together a calendar, because, you know, we've got to have a monthly calendar, but that was a great beginning.
I think it was a great beginning. It was a beginning. It was kind of ironic because it was getting towards the end of my time with the SART, because the rural grant through CAWS was ending. So being able to sit in the room, as you can see on the slide here, we were able then to revise those MOUs that we had, those agency-specific MOUs, include a protocol for when there were SANE services available in McKenzie County, and then ask the local newspaper to come and do a story on the SART. And that picture that you see on the screen was that milestone, that MOU signing with all of the partnering agencies at the table, to really show that belief in that cross-system collaborative response. And I know, Jesse, you had said something when we were talking about this, how you felt too, as Jennifer said, that this was such an important milestone from a law enforcement perspective.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I previously mentioned it before, but
Okay.
It did show the buy-in from everybody, and, you know, this is something that had to be done to move forward.
Okay. And Desiree, from your perspective as the director of the Social Services Agency there.
Once again, the support of being able to refer individuals to local agencies is obviously an amazing and wonderful system to have in place. No one likes to travel out of town to have to do any service.
Well, Susie, if I can as well, this is Jennifer. With the MOUs, there was no question of what was expected of each of us. our responsibilities were laid out very clearly of what we were agreeing to offer a victim and what part we would play in the service of that victim. And so I think that it was very important because you don't have to question. You know, department heads could tell everyone under them, this is what we do and this is how we do it, because it was very clearly laid out in those MOUs.
So really it helped to build that sense of both accountability for each of the agencies involved in the sexual assault response process, and then the idea of continuity.
Yes. Right? Absolutely.
Right, so as Jennifer mentioned, I handed the SART facilitation baton over to her, because my role as the facilitator, the leader for the SART team, ended with the end of our rural grant in 2016. So I'd like to hear from Jennifer, Jesse, Desiree. First, the strengths. Where is the McKenzie County SART team today?
Well, we have, I took that baton with a tear in my eye saying, Susie, please don't go. But it was time, and I had had more time to have my feet on the ground with my job, so I felt more acclimated to the position to be able to do that. And without a team, we're nothing. So, you know, Desiree made it really clear earlier how she personally had reached out to the clinics. That's what a team does. It takes everybody, and that's where we are today. We function as a team. I reached out about that time. Well, actually, this was pretty recent. I reached out to some community members because there was a need for an exam table that we still did not have, and the hospital was unable to afford that to us. So I reached out trying to find that equipment or a way to purchase that equipment, and by the end of that same day, I had a call from a Nova clinic saying, why don't you come and look at our facility, see if it's adequate for what you need. We're willing to offer you the confidentiality, whatever you need, but come and look, see what we've got, look at our space. So I was thrilled, and when I went in and talked to them, looked at the space, I knew that it was everything that we needed. So then I took it to the team, and they said, basically, this is not even a question. This is a no-brainer. This is perfect. So that's where we are now, is with that part of that move, that we will be in ANOVA at their clinic, which is kind of unusual because I think that most SART programs do run through a hospital.
So you're moving your SANE room to a standalone clinic in Watford City?
Yes.
Okay. Jesse, what are you seeing now with the SART? Where are you today?
Well, you know, one thing that I've noticed is obviously with the SART, we have a lot better services now today than we have ever had here in the county. And also, we show continuous growth with the team. There's a continued interest with members, and you know, more and more members from each agency continue to expand our team and show involvement with the team. Because initially, you know, we started with only very few members, and now I couldn't even tell you how many members are on the team because of there's more people coming each meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Including the sheriff's office, right? After many conversations, I know, and reaching out, and I think, Jennifer, you were the bring the donuts and the coffee to the sheriff's office on Monday morning. You've got the sheriff's office on board.
They definitely are on board, and they are present consistently now at the meetings, and we're thrilled with that. Their collaborative effort is definitely present, and we're thankful for that. One thing that we do still need is additional SANEs. So as we speak, there are 2 individuals who are starting training or about to start training for that. That will put us with 3 on a calendar rotation. That's still not enough. There is another that's a possibility. So we do still have that. And something that we've talked about, even at our last meeting, is the desire to have Fort Berthel's tribal advocate involved. We've sent several invitations via email, and at one point she said she was going to be there, and I understand that things happen, and especially if you're the only one in your office, some days you just can't cut loose and get away from what you're doing there to come to another area for a meeting. So we don't know what happened with that, but I'm going to continue to reach out to her. And, you know, one of the things that I want to mention at our next meeting is if anybody has any relationship with her personally, maybe they could reach out to her as well, because it's important. That continuity between our law enforcement and tribal police is very important, and I think that she can be a bridge there that's going to tighten that.
So what Jennifer is talking about is McKenzie County is right on the edge. So we're looking at the eastern border of McKenzie County is adjacent to a large tribal area, Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. And I agree with you. I think the improving that relationship with the tribal advocacy program, particularly with the many issues that are there with jurisdiction, is going to be something that the team needs to look at in the meetings in the months ahead. Jennifer, something else that I would like you to talk about is funding. How is the SART moving forward now with the funding needed to keep the team going and to keep the same services going?
Well, at the last meeting that we had, our prosecutor's office offered, and we were so thrilled to have this offer put on the table, they offered to begin to put some funding toward our program because they have fines that are appropriate to go toward that. And that's already, I was contacted a week ago, and the first check has already gone in, and so that was pretty awesome to have. So it's like we're getting our strong legs under us because we've got the financial aspect dealt with now too. And it's the beginning, and it's going to take a little bit for that to begin to build, but it's a start with that, and all of us, we're thrilled to have that piece, because at that same meeting, Tisha, our nurse examiner had said, you know, guys, I can only afford to support this on weekends. Well, so that still leaves us driving an hour or possibly an hour and a half. And so we thought, well, that's not going to work. And then right behind her comment came the state's attorney's office saying, what if we are able to toss money at that?
Right. So you're saying nurses are not actually employees of the hospital or the clinic. They are employees of the Central Dakota Forensic Nurse Examiners Agency.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Desiree, what are you feeling about the strengths of your team today?
I feel very strongly that we have been and continue to be very victim-centered. We are very aware of the trauma that is involved with the victims, and that is why, like Jesse and Jennifer and I have continually discussed throughout this webinar about how each one of our agencies has our area of strength and our role, and how we support one another to meet the needs of the victims and their support. And then also, like, by having the local services more and more readily available, that supports all of us.
And that is fantastic. That is, to me, another significant milestone in how far this team has come forward. That victim-centered, trauma-informed response is at the top of the list for what
Yes.
the SART is attempting to do or is doing.
And I
So
have
Desiree, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that from an advocacy standpoint, because, you know, we see things from the standpoint of what we do. And from that functionality, I have really got to give kudos to our law enforcement, because I had a new officer that had never dealt with the same exam before. That they called me and they said, what do? I want to do this according to protocol. Walk me through this. And I said, I love you. I love that, you know, he said, I want to do this right. And he was so caring, and that's the case with all of our officers. I just really have to brag on them because they are very careful and they understand the re-victimization potential that is there, and they don't want to do that. They don't, and by that, what I mean is that asking that that survivor to tell their story time and time again. We like to do that one time when we're all around the table together, and that's the hardest thing, because once they begin to share with that officer what has happened, often they want to just continue to talk, and we don't want them to have to regurgitate that same information. It's just not fair. Mm-hmm. So our officers are very mindful of that victim-centered treatment.
Desiree, with that in mind, are you seeing anything that right now for your SART team that is a possible gap or another issue that the team could be working on?
I think just basically making sure that we continue to meet, even when things are going good. There's still always that room for, okay, let's look at what we still can do to improve our system and improve the services that are available for victims. And then to continue to grow. And there is always staff changeovers within all the agencies that are involved and turnover. And so to make sure that everything is documented appropriately so that that information can be handed down and that someone who could potentially walk in and they know what their expectation is.
So the SART team now is meeting on a monthly basis, is that correct?
We're at a bi-monthly basis. Someone had suggested at one point that we skip to every 3 months, and that's just too much. We may have a period of time where there aren't assaults, but then, like recently, we've had 3 that I'm aware of, and I don't know what's happened with social services. So that's just with my agency that I'm aware of. So, there's a need for, we may have to go back to every month with things picking up in this Bakken area. With the increase, again, of individuals moving into this area, we may have to go back to every month.
Okay, just so you can, as Desiree said, stay in touch with each other, keep the keep the continuity going, look at your longevity and your sustainability, particularly for those protocols that we put into place.
Yes, and I just encourage that people who are beginning to think about their sexual assault response team and putting that together to remember that if you don't know something's broken, you can't fix it. So broken probably isn't the best word, but when we're around the table together and there's a hiccup, that's probably a better way to address it. There's a hiccup in the way something happened. We talk about, with respect, how we can make it better next time, how we can do it differently, and it's going to serve that victim better.
And Jennifer, I think that's a great segue into the last question that I have for you as members of the McKenzie County SART team. If you could give one piece of advice to a group of affiliated professionals working on developing or strengthening SART response, what would you say? So Jennifer, that was a great answer, and what you just said. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, Desiree already touched on the victim-centered mentality, and I think from my perspective, I know that is first and foremost. You just have to stay victim-centered because they need to understand that you are support. You are there to make happen what they want to happen. You're not driving this vehicle, they are. You're there to offer them, what do you want? Do you want all or part of that same kit done? What do you want? And I will do my level best to make that happen. That is victim-centered mentality, and that is first and foremost of importance.
Okay, Jessie, what would be your piece of advice to a group of affiliated professionals working on SART?
Really, just to make sure that you're Your team is very strong, that you guys have trust, teamwork, and you support one another because, as I mentioned before, that support or how you represent each other is going to determine the outcome of the situation. And we all know how the saying goes, united will stand, but divided will fall.
Okay, I really like that. I think that again, that idea of unified collaboration, everyone standing together with a purpose to help the victims of sexual violence. Desiree, what would be your advice?
My advice is for that every member of the SART team to maintain their own individual commitment level, and then also to have a willingness to learn, because throughout the years that we have done this together, that's where you see the growth, that's where you see the team building, and ultimately the strengths that we have of how we're able to serve victims in our community, which is wonderful, but we have still a lot of things to learn, and we are all on board with that.
Okay. And with that, I think we as a team are done. I want to thank NSVRC, Christina in particular, for helping the McKenzie County SART team come together and provide the information for this webinar.
Well, thank you, Susie, and everyone else. I really appreciate you taking the time to share the experience that you've had and what brought you all together as a team. And it's just really great to hear that things are going well, and I just love hearing that more and more people want to be at that table. I think there's really something about having a SART champion, and there's this aspect of SART work that really motivates people to move forward and come together. That's really hard to articulate, and I think you all have been able to talk a little bit about kind of that piece in today's chat. So I really appreciate you being here and really being frank and sharing your experiences with the field. I just want to remind people who are viewing this webinar that NSVRC is available for technical assistance. So if you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call. The website, again, for the SART Toolkit, where there is a ton of information, resources, and list of subject matter experts, is www.nsvrc.org/SART Toolkit. And I want to thank everyone listening today. I want to thank OVC for the funding to make this possible, and I definitely want to thank our presenters today. I really appreciate, again, everything that you shared, and I want to thank, again, everyone who is listening. I hope this was useful to you in the field, and we would love to hear from you. If you take something from this webinar and you use it, so please feel free to reach out and share. Thanks so much, and have a great day.